Great. Great, great, great. All right. All right, Josh. Yeah, when you're done with that, I'm gonna go ahead and start taking off some preliminary stuff. Yep, no worries, no worries. That's more important. Stop. I'm gonna clear this stuff off your desk. Sorry. Actually, is this yours? No, is that yours? Okay, I'm gonna recycle it. Okay, then I'll leave it for Dory.
Can you hear me now?
It should be, yeah.
Okay, everyone's quieting down. Good afternoon. I'm Pam Sebesky. I'm the chair of the Transportation Planning Board, and I call the TPB's March 16th, 2022 meeting to order for the first time in person in 2 years. I am glad that we can meet in person and to be able to have actually met some people in person versus just virtually. And I am looking forward to more meetings like this where I get to have the opportunity to meet more people. You're missing a great lunch, and for those of you who are joining us virtually, and a great colorful brochure from COG about the Metropolitan Washington Planning Framework. This is based on much of TPB's work over the last 5 years. Staff will make sure that each of you that are joining us virtually will get a copy as well. Also, staff thanks you in advance for your patience and feedback as they inaugurate the technology and arrangements to conduct this hybrid format of our meeting. We continue to live stream the audio and video of this meeting on TPB's YouTube channel. I will review the process staff has devised for this hybrid meeting. We will see how it works, and we will learn and make changes as needed as we move forward. Members in the room, please use the microphone when you speak and position the microphone close to your mouth so that those online and those watching the broadcast can hear you. Those participating online, friendly reminder to mute your microphones always, and importantly, to unmute your mic and state your name and jurisdiction when you speak. You're going to hear me say that a lot today about stating your name and jurisdiction. We will dispense with the roll call and instead have staff identify members who are participating online and confirm we have a quorum. With the gradual return to in-person meeting, we are continuing the practice of receiving public comments online. So I will ask Lynn to report to comments received from the public. Members who are participating virtually, please know that staff is monitoring the WebEx and its chat feature. Please use the raised hand icon if you wish to be recognized. For all the agenda items after the presentations, I will first recognize members who are here in the room for comments and questions. Thereafter, staff will identify members online with raised hands who will be recognized by turn to comment or ask questions. For agenda items that we will be voting on, I will call for a voice vote first for those of us here in the room, and thereafter I will ask for the vote of members online by turn and only for nays and abstentions, like we did with all the virtual meetings over the last 2 years. In case there's a request made for a roll call vote, staff will call the roll in the order listed on the roster, some of whom will be in the room, others will be online. With that, I think we're ready to get started. Okay, as always, we will start with the review and approval of the minutes of the February 16th, 2022 meeting.
Madam Chair?
Yes, ma'am, we start.
We have public comments, and then Lynn can also report on the participants.
Oh, did I skip a section? I'm sorry.
Okay. So Lynn?
All good. So what I'm going to start with, Chair Sebesky, is just for the purpose of who's here and who's who, I'm just going to read the names of the folks in the room, and then I'm going to read the names of the people on the WebEx, because for those people on the WebEx, just so you know, the people in the room actually can't necessarily see the participant list. So I'm just going to go around the room right now. I see James Walkinshaw, Kelly Russell, Kenneth Aguirre, Casey Kostick, Chair Sabeski, Takis, and I'm sorry I can't pronounce her last name very well, Karatanis. Thanks, thanks. Ann Wheeler, John Lynch, and David Meyer. Those are our folks in the room, and on the phone, WebEx rather, we have Adam Schellenberger, Dave Marston's office, Ashley Hudson, our CAC chair, Councilmember Glass's office, Dan Maliff, Dave Snyder, David Edmondson, Evan Glass, Gary Ehrenrich, Heather Edelman, Kristen Umstadt, Kristen Calkins, Leslie Rupert, Mark Mishler, Mark Rawlings, Maddie Bezerto, Mayor Rochelle, Neil Harris, Reuben Collins, Robert Brown, Rodney Roberts, Victor Angry, Victor Weisberg, and Walter Alcorn. So we do, and Patrick Willian just walked in. Good afternoon, Patrick. So that concludes basically our quick roll call. We have a quorum. And if you don't mind, Chair Skabeski, I will go into the public comment.
Not at all.
Great, thank you. So for the March 2022 TPB meeting, the TPB received a total of 3 comments that were emailed to us. A memo with the summary of the comments as well as the comments themselves can be found on our TPB page. The first comment is an email from Stuart Schwartz of the Coalition for Smarter Growth. He says, first, we honor local elected officials in Ukraine who are courageously putting their lives on the line for their citizens. Second, we urge you to do what you can do here, now, in this region, to end our oil dependency and to address climate change in the short time we have left to do so. We received an email from Arlene Montemurano, who sent an article titled, Corporations Benefit from Transit, so why aren't they paying for it? This was from an organization called In the Public Interest. Lastly, Robert Filipowski submitted a comment via our online form. The comment listed suggestions for improving the region's land use and transportation systems. As I mentioned, all comments are found on our meeting page. That concludes my report. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. So I think now we can get started with approval of the minutes from the February 16th, 2022 meeting. To keep it simple, I will invite a motion from the members present in the room to adopt the minutes as provided. Please state your name and jurisdiction as you make the motion, as well as the person that seconds.
So moved, Madam Chair. Takis Karantanis, Harvard City Council.
Seconded, Casey Kostick from Tacoma Park.
Thank you. Any corrections or additions to the meeting minutes from those in the room? From staff? And those online? Anyone need to be recognized?
Anybody
No?
online?
Okay. For the vote then, for first those in the room, any nays or abstentions? Next to those online, any nays or abstentions? Okay. So I will assume a unanimous approval of the minutes. Moving along, now to the technical committee report. We have a written summary of the March 4th meeting. Let me recognize Matt Arcieri from the City of Manassas, Chair of the Technical Committee, who is here in person. Welcome, Matt. Great to see you. Matt, is there anything from the meeting that you would like to highlight or expand on?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am Matt Arcieri with the City of Manassas, and so honored to be serving as the Technical Chair this year. On the March 4th meeting, we did receive a briefing on the items that are on your agenda for the March agenda, so I won't belabor those. The Technical Committee was very excited to see the presentation and the online tool that will be previewed for the bicycle and pedestrian plan. So that's something that we look forward to seeing the TPB getting input on that. And then we also continue our discussion with a big focus on the climate change element of the long-range transportation plan and some of the discussion that this board will be having. Otherwise, you have my written summary, and I stand ready for any additional questions.
Great. Thank you, Matt. Are there any questions from anyone in person? How about online?
We don't see any hands
I
raised.
don't see any hands. Okay. Thank you, Matt. Moving right along, next we'll have a report from the Community Advisory Committee. We have a written summary of the March 10th meeting. Let me recognize the chair, Ashley Hudson, who is participating virtually. Ashley, is there anything from the meeting that you would like to highlight or expand on?
Yes, and thank you, Chair Sebeski, for the opportunity. The Community Advisory Committee to the TPB met on Thursday, March 10th for an online-only meeting. COG Director of Community Planning and Services, Paul Desjardins, provided summary of the current cooperative forecast of the Washington region and explained how it is used to inform COG and TPB work activities. The committee asked questions about expected growth, how to figure the number of people per household, and how to calculate the jobs increase. Brian Hayes briefed the committee on plans for promoting awareness of the comment period for Visualize 2045, including postcards and virtual open houses, and Rachel briefed the committee on the ambassador program for Visualize 2045. Following these presentations, we divided the committee into small groups and were asked to provide comment on in-person meetings and to discuss the meeting with TPB officers. When the group came back together, they shared their willingness to hold in-person meetings quarterly, but prefer a large space to spread out and to keep doors open for airflow. There was agreement that meeting each other in person would strengthen the connections and cohesion between committee members, and to think some of us, including myself, have still never been to the COG building or met anyone on this committee in person. So definitely looking forward to the opportunity to meet everyone in real life. And then, as I mentioned last month, committee members would like to form relationships with the TPB officers and their local TPB representatives. Committee members shared a few topics they would like to hear from you all, including what you all believe are the most pressing issues for the region, plans for using the federal infrastructure funding, and how Visualize 2045 aligns with local plans such as Move DC. The committee is hoping we can coordinate a time to meet with TPB officers and any other interested TPB representatives, both in small groups separated by state and together as a group to discuss local and regional activities. The TPB staff is aiming to hold this meeting in May or June. So that concludes my report of the March CAC meeting, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashley, for the great report. And I actually have also followed up asking about the officers, especially meeting with the members of CAC and maybe and hopefully even a broader group of the representation on TPB. I agree that the more understanding this group can have about what we do here, the better we can get feedback from this group. So as you already stated, they're looking at something towards May, June, and hopefully we'll have more information next month to share with you on that. That being said, I will call for questions for Ashley from anyone that's in the room. How about online? I don't see anything unless staff tells me different. Okay. Thank you, Ashley. And we're going to move along. Okay, now to the report from the director. We have a written summary of the March 4th Steering Committee, as well as a report on letters sent, received, and other items of interest. Conti, is there anything you would like to highlight and anything new to share with the board?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the board. I'll start with saying that your staff are really very glad to be able to restart the in-person board meetings. We thank you, all of you, for your and your alternates and your staff for the patience and understanding over the past 2 years. As we quickly pivoted to virtual meetings, we had to figure out the technology. I'm sure there were hiccups on our part, so I appreciate your patience and understanding in putting up with all of that. So today, as we begin the in-person meetings, as you can, those of you in the boardroom are able to see, we are testing some new equipment, new technology. Hopefully this will work. We will figure out the best and optimum use of all of this to make this a good experience for those in the room and those participating virtually. I do want to take a moment to acknowledge and thank all of the IT staff here at COG who did a fantastic job with the unprecedented changes that they had to implement with the IT systems within the building for the past 2 years. The amount of equipment that had to be tested, purchased, implemented, and training all the staff, it was a lot of work for them. And just within the TPB side, we've hosted a little north of 250 virtual meetings in the past 2 years, with all of this while also testing and trialing the equipment. So special thanks to all of them. With that, from my memo, there were 2 amendments that the steering committee approved on your behalf. Details of the TIP amendment for project in Maryland, which is a truck parking center in the Welcome Center along I-70. Details of that amendment are on pages 4 through 12. And the second amendment was for WMATA, where the funding amounts for several projects were updated to match the WMATA's funding level as proposed in their FY23 capital budget, which I understand they will be acting on next week. So members are also aware that the 2021 Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act increased the funding available for many USDOT grants, including the RACE grant. TPB is providing letters of support for a number of projects from Loudoun County, Prince William County, Montgomery County. Just this morning, Chair Sabeski, you signed one more letter. The details are on pages 35 through 38. Members are also aware that the Commuter Connections launched various campaigns to bring back people to carpools, van pools, and transit as the region gradually returns to the office. This campaign the title of this campaign is Commute with Confidence. And the newest element of this campaign is a series of Facebook Live video discussions where staff discuss the various services and benefits that are available to the region's residents for commuting purposes. February 23rd, live events had you, Chair Sabeski, discuss commuter connections and commuting options. Thank you very much for taking the time to do that.
My pleasure.
An important reminder, the Climate Change Mitigation Survey is due by close of business April 1st. So please feel free to email me should you have any questions about this survey or need any assistance in the process of reviewing and providing our input. We are really aiming for a very high response rate from our members. A couple other notifications, if I may, that were not in the memo. We will be hosting a 4-part webinar series on transportation resiliency planning. And the first of this 4 series will be on April 8th. There will be more information coming your way. We will also be holding a 30-day public comment period on the results of the air quality conformity analysis for the updated Visualize 2045 plan. Work is being completed right now. We expect to have all of the results ready for release for public comments by April 1st. In addition to the air quality conformity results, we will also be releasing the Visualize 2045 plan document itself, as well as the TIP. During this 30-day period, we will also be briefing all of the TPB committees, the Technical Committee, Access for All Advisory Committee, the Community Advisory Committee, and we will also be holding 2 virtual open houses for the public. The first one will be on April 6th for the evening, 7 to 8 p.m., and the second one midday, April 7th from 12 p.m. to 1:15. And finally, we will also be hosting a public forum on our Transportation Improvement Program, the TIP, on April 14th. That is where we anticipate having the state DOTs and representatives from our transit agencies, such as WMATA, be able to provide more information or answer any questions on the amount of funding that's programmed to be spent within the 4 years. The plan, as you all know, expands more than 20 years, but the program is really what is budgeted for the next 4 years. So those are some of the series of activities planned within the next month. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Conti. Yes, as you can tell, much going on. I'll first start with any questions for Conti from members that are in the room. Casey, go ahead.
Thank you. Is this working?
I have to turn it on, maybe?
It is on.
Oh,
It is
Okay.
on.
All right. So thank you very much. Just was thinking, because I've had the opportunity over the past couple of days to be at the National League of Cities conference, where we've heard a lot about the bipartisan infrastructure law and some of the opportunities there to apply for grants specifically focused on safety, which is something I know is a real interest in this room for both our individual agencies as well as the broader MPO. And it seems like MPOs are going to be an entity that can apply for some of those safety grants. So I was just curious if there was any work being done to focus specifically on something TPB might apply for, or encouraging member jurisdictions to apply for those things, or just kind of thinking about that as an opportunity.
Okay. Just for the benefit of those who might be online, the question was, is there been any thought given from the TPB staff for applying for any of the new discretionary grants that might be available from USDOT for a host of new programs, particularly those around safety? The USDOT has been gradually releasing specific program guidelines for the new programs. It is not there fully. Till last week, the funding for FY 2022 had not been approved. The USDOT was operating on a continuing resolution. The newest omnibus bill fully funds USDOT for FY 2022. That is the year that we are already in. So we anticipate getting detailed regulations and program guidance that we will certainly be looking into. We will be working with the technical committee and the state DOTs if there are any opportunities where the MPO could also apply. One of the things that I would note, the existing programs and all of the new programs, MPOs such as TPB have been added as an additional applicant, which means local governments and state governments have always been eligible. So there might be a question of how does an MPO application compete with the local applications and the state applications. In the past, that has been an issue, but with about 20% across the board increase in federal funding, there might be opportunities where the MPO can assist local governments and state DOTs without necessarily precluding or in any way disadvantaging their applications, where we can come up with some project ideas which would complement local applications. So that's something that we will be looking at. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Go ahead.
Madam Chair. Thank you for the report, Mr. Sukant. I have a question about you mentioned the RAISE grant applications. I know there are a lot of them probably coming out of the region. Is there, are there particular, in terms of, is TPB, are we supporting every project that comes forward, or is there a particular way that we're prioritizing?
Okay. So again, for the benefit of those online, the question was, as TPB receives requests to issue a letter of support for a RAISE grant from one of its member jurisdictions, is it prioritized, and if so, how? The general approach that we have been using is we look at all of the TPB adopted goals and planning priorities, and if a project that is being submitted for grant proposal by any of the TPB member jurisdictions that advances any of those goals or planning priorities, that would be the first and the predominant criteria we would use. If the project is not fully consistent with the TPB's goals and planning priorities, then we reach out to the local jurisdiction staff to fully understand. So far, most of the projects, particularly with RAISE, which used to be called Tiger in its previous version, most of those project eligibilities are very consistent with TPB goals and priorities. And all of the applications that we have supported so far over the years, they all advance one or more of the TPB's goals.
Thank you.
Any other questions from those present? How about online?
Yes, Rodney Roberts has a question.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, I appreciate it. I was wondering if I could get, when the materials on the 2045 plan come out, can I get some hard copies of that sent over to the city of Greenbelt so that I can get it to my colleagues and stuff?
Certainly, Mr. Roberts, we can have copies of the full set of documents that go for public comments sent to members' addresses. We can certainly do that.
I appreciate that. Thank you. That's all I have right now.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Roberts. Is there anybody else? I'll look to Lynn and Leah. Okay. All right. Then I guess we're going to move on. I don't see any further comments. Okay. Under Chairman's remarks, I have just a couple of items. You all have by now received the climate change survey from the staff. I have begun discussing this with my colleagues and staff in the city of Manassas, and I strongly encourage all of you to do the same. As we've talked about this the last few months, it's very important that when these surveys are done, that they're coming from both the electeds as well as the staff and the jurisdictions. And so please complete the survey and provide with the staff input from the jurisdictions, as I mentioned. When I accepted the chair's responsibility, I am committed to continue to enhance our long-range transportation plan document and the process. In 2018, we did a similar exercise with the Long Range Plan Task Force, which examined 10 scenarios focused on improving the system performance, and the board added 5 of these as aspirational initiatives to the Long Range Plan and to our process. Now we have examined 10 scenarios focused on mitigating climate change impacts by reducing on-road greenhouse gas emissions, and we want to add some of the greenhouse gas reduction strategies to the long-range plan and our process. This survey will help determine what strategies the majority of the jurisdictions can support that we can adopt at this time. Next month, we will hold a work session, as already has been stated, just before the monthly meeting, where we can discuss the findings from the survey and begin crafting a set of strategies that everyone is comfortable adopting. Lastly, we received this very nice looking and equally informative brochure that I talked about earlier that COG has published, the Metropolitan Washington Planning Framework. We heard about this from Chuck Bean, COG's executive director, a couple of months ago. This document recognizes the interdependencies of transportation, housing, land use, climate, planning work, and the importance of doing all this work in an equitable manner. So much of this regional planning framework is based on the TPB's work, our aspirational initiatives of bringing jobs and housing closer together, and our work with high-capacity transit stations and building transit-oriented communities, the equity emphasis areas that we developed, and also the National Capital Trail Network. We are all doing this work within our jurisdictions, yet having such a document that brings it all together in an easy-to-understand manner helps us communicate with our stakeholders and the public that we all interact with, and even with each other. I thank COG for doing all of this work. I recall last month that there was a series of briefings on a number of items, and this month we have to take action on these. Well, now let's get started with our action agenda. Lynn, I understand we received no comments and we have the final revenue numbers, so please update us with the final TPP budget and work program that we reviewed last month. Take it away.
Great. Thank you, Chair Sebesky. So we're pulling up our presentation. Great. So I'm going to quickly go over 2 things today, the actions you're going to be asked to take and the changes to the draft since the February presentation. So we're going to be asking for 2 approvals. One, Resolution R10-2022. So that's an action to amend the current UPWP to remove funding. The second is to carry it over into the new 2023 UPWP, and I went over this all last month. Once that's done, then we can adopt Resolution R11-2022, which will approve the UPWP, the 2023 version, in its entirety. All right, so what changed since last month? The carryover information has not changed. We are planning to carry over $1.4 million into the FY 2023 UPWP, and that information has already been written into the new 2023 UPWP that you saw in February. Last month, I talked about how we basically start with a reasonable guess for how much funding we will be getting. At that time, we hadn't heard the final numbers from the states. Fortunately, we were pretty close because our final budget numbers are now at $19.495 million. So this is a little higher than what we presented last month. So the only pages in the document that changed are my favorite 3 pages that I directed you to review last month, tables 1, 2, and 3. So our budgeting process is basically we identify all the tasks and then reconcile them with the revenues that are available. So the revenue available in February was a little lower than what we had wanted to program. So our final numbers actually backfill what we consider a funding reduction from our February DAP for a big data purchase and will allow us to fill a couple of vacancies. So next steps. So we submit, once you do the approvals, we submit the 2023 UPWP to USDOT for approval. It takes them around 30 to 60 days to review it and approve it. After that, then we need to get a separate funding authorization from DDOT, MDOT, VDOT, and VDRPT, and work starts on July 1st. So with that, staff recommends approval of our resolution, Resolution R10-2022 and Resolution R11-2022. Thank you.
Thanks, Lynn. It appears that we have 2 actions to take, and we will do these one at a time. First, I will invite again for convenience devotion from a member in the room to adopt Resolution R10-2022 to amend FY 2022 UPWP and carryover funds and work activities to next fiscal year FY 2023.
So moved. This is Patrick Wyan from College Park.
Is there a second?
Seconded, Brian Lee from Laurel, Maryland.
Great. So since we have a motion on the table and a second, are there any comments or questions from those in the room? How about online? No. Great.
There's one.
There is one. Oh, from Mr. Glass.
Mr. Glass, go ahead.
Good afternoon, everybody. Remiss that I'm not there with you all in person, but I look forward to getting there next month. And so I appreciate this conversation, and Ms. Erickson, the simplicity in which you're presenting it. I've been talking with a number of people and just want to clarify with regards to the budget and the workload that we set forth moving forward. Last year, this body passed a resolution where we dedicated ourselves to looking at all future projects through a climate lens. And there seems to be some questions about whether the TPB's staff has the capacity under this resolution, under this proposed funding, to do that work. And so I just wanted to clarify right now whether that is correct or incorrect.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Glass. This is Kanti Srikant. So the resolution that the TPB adopted last year as part of approving the projects that would be included in the current update of the plan said that the TPB will update this plan once again in 2 years. It called it an interim update because federally we are required to update this once every 4 years. And so the next update, so we are updating this in 2022. The interim update will be in 2024. The work for the 2024 update will begin later this year after July. It will not be completed within the next year, but it will spill over into the following year as well. So the budget that we have proposed for the next year includes funding for the plan update. The budget we will propose for the year after that will also include some funding for the plan update. So the brief answer is yes, we will have the funding needed to do the work activities.
I appreciate that simple response as well, and I am satisfied. So thank you both very much.
Thanks.
There's another question from Mr. Snyder.
Okay, go ahead.
Sure, thank you very much. I shared the same question with Evan Glass and thank Conti for the response. One other issue relates to safety. We have focused on that recently in a very strong way, and I wanted to ask Conti if he feels that the UPWP adequately will maintain our initiatives. Regrettably, the highway safety isn't getting any better, and I think we all feel a need to do everything we can as a region, as well as in our localities, to deal more effectively with highway safety. So I would ask a similar question that Evan asked on the environment, which I share, but also one on safety priorities. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Snyder. Good point. Once again, this brief answer is yes. The proposed budget continues to set aside $250,000 each year to provide as planning grants to the TPB members to conceive of, to plan, and potentially preliminary engineer solutions to improve the safety outcomes on our regional roadways. In addition to that, that's a new grant program. We took away some money that in the past was used for planning and moved it towards implementation. So that is being continued. In addition to that, we also have continued funding for the planning level activities oriented on safety. We have a safety subcommittee. That subcommittee activities are fully funded. Additionally, we are already working with the 3 state DOTs and their safety engineers to come brief the TPB during the remaining part of this calendar year, because to better understand what additional programs and strategies are being implemented at the state level. Because as you have rightly said, and this board has officially said a number of times, it is totally unacceptable, the level of roadway safety outcomes that we see in our region.
Thank you.
No further questions online.
Okay, with no further questions, I guess we're ready for a vote. Again, for those in the room, any nays or abstentions? And online, are there any nays or abstentions? Okay. So with that, it looks like unanimous approval of R10-2022. And we'll move on to the next. Last action under this item, again, for the convenience, I would like a motion from someone in the room to adopt Resolution R11-2022 to approve 2023 UPW. Is there a second, a motion and a second?
I make a motion that we adopt R11-2022.
Brian Lee.
Brian Lee.
City of Laurel.
And Kanik Aguirre seconded. Okay, any comments or questions from those in the room? And what about online?
Nope. No, none online.
Okay, great. Okay, then we can call for the vote. Are there any nays or abstentions from those in the room? Okay, and how about online? Okay, looks like unanimous approval of that resolution as well. Thank you, Lynn. Okay, moving right along here. Nick, please update us on any changes to the draft on the Commuter Connections budget and work program that we reviewed last month.
Okay.
Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. In your agenda packet today, there is a final draft of the FY 2023 Commuter Connections work program. It was presented at the February 16th board meeting, and we did not receive any comments. There were some minor corrections made throughout the document. There's some technical corrections and some typos and There was a little bit of a streamlining of the budget, but the budget is still the same. It hasn't changed. There was just a few line items that did change. But other than that, the document is pretty much intact. And so before you today is Resolution R12-2022, and staff is recommending approval of that resolution. And I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Great. Thanks, Nick. I invite again for the convenience a motion from someone in the room to adopt Resolution R12-2022 to approve the FY 2023 Commuter Connections Work Program. Is there a motion?
So moved, Chair Sabeski. Tax card on San Jose County.
Thank you.
Second, Ann Wheeler, Prince William County.
Thank you. Okay. Having a motion on the floor, are there any comments or questions from those in the room? And how about online?
No question.
Okay. If not, we'll go ahead and call for the vote. Are there any nays or abstentions from those in the room? And how about from anybody online? Any nays or abstentions? Okay. It looks like unanimous approval. Thank you, Nick.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. Now to the last of our action items, establishing asset management targets for the transit systems in our region. Eric, please brief us on any updates to the draft targets that we received last month. Welcome.
Certainly, Madam, and good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the board. Last month, you were briefed about the federal requirement to set performance targets for transit assets in the region. As a region, $1 billion or more are spent on transit asset management, or TAM, annually. The annual targets set by WMATA and the other local transit providers attempt to capture the outputs of this investment as intended by the federal requirement. In February, you were presented with a set of draft targets for the 4 TAM performance measures, which are subdivided across different asset classes. For example, buses, articulated buses, commuter buses, and streetcars in the revenue vehicle measure, or for rail stations and maintenance buildings in the facility condition performance measures. Next page, please. These regional targets were developed using the individual targets adopted by transit agencies across the region and have been reviewed by the TPB Technical Committee and the TPB Regional Public Transportation Subcommittee. Following the presentation of the draft targets at your February meeting, no comments have been received. Accordingly, staff recommend the approval of Resolution R13-2022 to adopt these TAM targets. Following your approval, these adopted targets can be incorporated into the Visualized 2045 Long-Range Transportation Plan and the FY 2023-2026 TIP that you will be seeing next month. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. I invite a motion from a member in the room to adopt Resolution R13 to approve transit asset targets for the transit systems in our region.
So moved. This is Patrick Wine from College Park.
Thank you, Patrick. Is there a second?
Second, Ann Wheeler, Prince William County.
Thank you. Great. So with that, the motion on the floor, are there any questions for Eric from anyone in the room? Seeing none, is there any from anybody online? No. There are no questions, and we're ready for the question. Is there any nays or abstentions from anybody in the room? How about online? Okay. Hearing none, that seems to be unanimously approved. Thank you again for that.
Madam Chair.
Okay, looks like we're moving along here, if I'm following this agenda correctly. Next we have, if I'm correct, we're done with the action items, correct? We're ready to move on to the informational items?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Okay, great, thank you. Just making sure. All right, next, Andrew Meese on staff will brief us on the draft 2022 bicycle and pedestrian plan for the National Capital Region. This plan is a compilation of the bike and pedestrian facilities that the TPB member jurisdictions plan to build in the coming years. While we are familiar with the plans for our own jurisdictions, being able to see all the plans in the region stitched together will be useful for us to coordinate and collaborate. Andrew, take it away. Thank you.
So, Madam Chair, as Andrew gets ready, just perhaps a couple of overarching comments on these next couple items, particularly in the context of us being in the process of adopting the updated Visualized 2045 plan. The long-range transportation plan, one of the most noticed or noticeable element of that are all the highway projects and the transit construction projects that are in the plan. And because we are a non-attainment area, the air quality conformity analysis that we do, the emissions concern, so all of that is generally the topics that are more focused on. But the long-range transportation plan is a comprehensive plan. That means it has lots of other elements in it. A plan for regional freight movement is part of our long-range transportation plan. Bicycle and pedestrian planning activities are part of our long-range transportation plan. Transportation safety is part of our long-range transportation plan. How well we manage our highway assets, our bridges and pavements. What is the condition of our pavements and bridges in our region? How much are we spending? Is that spending improving the condition of the pavements and bridges? That is part of our long-range plan. Transit assets, that the target that we just approved, Eric noted $1 billion is spent each year in our region just on transit assets. This is not capital operating costs. Operating costs just of Metro is $2 billion a year. Just on the assets, we spend $1 billion each year. And we are establishing targets. And I'm not saying that $1 billion is enough. It isn't. Whatever is being spent, are we seeing improvements in these assets that support the transit system? That is part of our long-range plan. So there are lots of other elements that we try to bring to the board, not in one setting, but we bring to you as and when those work activities are done. So it is by nature a little bit hard to get that comprehensive view. But this long-range plan document that we are producing, that you will all see come April 1st, tries to bring all of this together in one document. It will still be a couple hundred pages, not really light reading, but still very informative. So that is the overall context, and this bicycle and pedestrian plan is one of the elements of that. So, Andrew, with that.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Sebeski and members of the board. I'm here today for a first presentation on the draft 2022 bicycle and pedestrian plan for the National Capital Region. Here it is printed out in hard copy. This was provided to you in your read-ahead materials. Today I'm going to give highlights of what's in the plan. Let me click to the next slide here. And this supersedes the plan that the TPB approved back in 2015. And of course, a lot has happened since 2015. Very notably, the TPB's development and approval of a National Capital Trail network, the first time that there was a branded network of this type in the region. And certainly the evolution of the world, the new kinds of facilities, micromobility and so forth has come along. And we've had, on the in-house side, we've had some technical enhancements that help us make our job, be able to do our job better. So I think echoing on what Conti just mentioned, why develop a regional bicycle and pedestrian plan since there is the visualized 2045 comprehensive transportation plan? And certainly bicycling and walking are important. They're growing as modes of transportation in the region, and they support many COG and TPB goals. And just mentioning a few of here, the environmental goals, land use, health, and equity. But this is also an opportunity to get into more specialized information and more detail than you can in the overall plan. So we can look more at bicycling and walking trends. We can talk more about policy considerations like safety, complete streets, green streets, and talk about best practices. And additionally, this gives us an opportunity to describe and analyze a planned regional bicycle and pedestrian network. So if the National Capital Trail Network is a branded, priority network, this is the larger group of facilities that are planned, and we can count how many miles. We can look at how close populations are or jobs are, this kind of thing. And I do want to emphasize, and I think, Conti, you mentioned this, that what is in this regional plan always comes compiled from the approved agency and local jurisdictional plans. So this is a compilation of your approved plans. Now, this does include both funded and unfunded projects. So that's, I guess, thinking about Visualize 2045, and there's a financially constrained element, and there's aspirational elements. So we have unfunded in this particular plan as well. What's in the draft plan? So this is a summary slide in the left column, looks at things that are more or less carry forward from the previous 2015 version, of course, with updates and enhancements, and then things that are new for 2022. Already had a discussion about the new federal legislation, and of course, we're just getting our understanding around that. So we have some discussion of that more to come. Second, and it has been talked about, this board created a new regional roadway safety program where we provide assistance to local jurisdictions, consultant assistance, to try to encourage and foster implementation of safety improvements at the jurisdictional level. We've had, once every 10 years, TPB undertakes a big household travel survey, the regional travel survey. And since 2015, we have a new one and has new updated information that we can talk about and use in this plan. New facility types, I'll talk about that a little bit more. We've talked about the National Capital Trail Network, and it was we took a fresh start approach, which is with the new database technologies and GIS that we're using internally. We sort of went back to the jurisdictions and started from scratch. So we've got a clean and new list of projects, and we do very much appreciate all the hard work that your staffs helped us out by getting all that information in, because we can only have this information when we are provided it by our member agencies and jurisdictions. So that was an undertaking. And there was mention of by our tech committee chair of the interactive dashboard. We hope to demonstrate that at a future meeting. We're still doing some fine tuning on that, but that'll take this printed document and make it more alive so that you can interact with it and do searches and zoom in and so forth. So let me just briefly go through the major sections of the plan as you will find them as you review the document, and that's the story here today, is the document being provided to you for review. It starts off with the planning context, and we do have a strong planning context here, including the regional programs that you're probably so familiar with the policies like Complete Streets and Green Streets, our Visualize 2045 plan, what we've done in the TIP, the NCTN again. And not only the regional roadway safety programs, but many of these other programs that you heard about in recent years, Transportation Land Use Connections, Transportation Alternatives Program, Transit Asset Focus Areas, Commuter Connections, including Bike to Work Day, and of course there's federal guidance and legislation that's talked about. And we're very blessed in this region with a lot of strong plans at the state and local level, and as WMATA as well, which provide a lot of very good information that we can echo and we can certainly point to in this plan. Second, the plan takes an opportunity to try to gather what we can about bicycling and walking in the region, the numbers that we can get, the activities, and certainly featuring the regional travel survey. So I have an example here of one of the many graphics that you'll find in the plan, and we like this particular one because it shows in this 10-year period, you can see at the bottom, 2007/8 to 2017/18, how much bicycling as a mode of transportation grew, particularly in those core jurisdictions at the top. The significant investment in infrastructure has made notable dividends in using these non-polluting modes as opposed to more driving. We have a separate chapter on bicyclist safety. We can never say enough about safety. Certainly, that is a core focus of our planning here. As Conti mentioned, we have a separate transportation safety subcommittee with a lot of safety studies and so forth. So this, in the bicycle and pedestrian plan, we reflect that appropriately here. 3 E's is, and there's more E's too probably, but that are commonly discussed: the engineering, the education, and enforcement. These are all been discussed here. But there's no doubt that safety remains a serious concern. As you can see in this example graph, the numbers have gone in the wrong direction recently. This is, certainly a national phenomenon as well as a local phenomenon for various reasons. But we continue to, as committees and staff, to work on this actively. But information is included in the plan. A next part of the plan talks about the kinds of facilities, the kinds of things that engender the numbers you saw a couple slides ago. The new protected low-stress type facilities for bicycles, improved pedestrian access to metro, this kind of thing. And of course, there's micromobility, which in a sense came to us from the outside. This was the private sector suddenly introducing a lot of micromobility, and it's had its blessing and its challenges, but we certainly have worked with it, and it's in the plan as well. We have a chapter on best practices, recommended practices, and this is strongly based, on the previous plans, which I think had a lot of good information, and we've updated these appropriately with some more information on accessibility for persons with disabilities and on micromobility. And the last major section of the plan talks about this 2045 network. So as I mentioned before, we're describing a network of the planned projects around the region by our agencies and jurisdictions. And we can map it, we can measure it. And you can see some of the basic numbers here. And I should point out that we have a draft right now. This is a draft plan. There will probably be some additional fine tuning over the next couple of months and technical corrections and so forth. So we have a draft right now. There is a list in the appendix of 1,650 some projects that are all of your projects over this 20-plus year period, measuring, as per our mapping, about 2,500 miles. And of that 2,500 miles, 1,880 of them are what are classified as the most desired low-stress facilities that bicyclists or other travelers of various ages and abilities can use that and feel safe while they're using them. And so by analyzing that in a GIS buffer analysis, this showed how the majority of the population, jobs, and areas in the region are going to be within proximity of the planned networks. 76% of the population, 87% of the jobs within a half a mile of this low-stress network, 94% of the activity centers, 80% of the equity emphasis areas, and 86% of the transit access focus areas. We do have a price tag on this. This is pretty much a back of the envelope based on mileage of $5 billion. That's just to give you an order of magnitude. That's certainly not an amalgamation of engineering estimates by each agency or anything like that. And again, the full list is in the appendix. But I did want to show you this particular slide here because I want to explain and clarify what this plan has versus the National Capital Trail Network. So you can see the mileage here, and pause for a minute and think about, okay, so the low-stress network of the plan, everything is planned. So by definition, if a facility exists, it's not in the plan. So that's limited to that. So the numbers that you saw on the last slide are probably conservative in terms of access because we're not giving any credit to existing facilities already. So some mature jurisdictions have a lot of access already. So that's just the plan. Whereas the National Capital Trail Network, as you recall from 2020, it has some parts that are already existing and some parts that are planned. So you can see that split out here, 779 planned miles, 644 existing miles. And these are 2020 figures. We're going to have to do a little bit of technical update to get these finalized in the next couple of months, but this is certainly the order of magnitude. And you can see the comparative percentage of population within half a mile or percentage of jobs and the total miles. So the story here is these are overlapping items. Certainly everything that's planned on the National Capital Trail Network is intended to be in the bicycle and pedestrian plan. But of course, there's also existing things. So, thinking about that. So hopefully that explanation helps a little bit. Now, here is a single map, and this is also, you'll find this in the document, and we certainly can acknowledge that this isn't as good as the interactive tool that you'll be seeing soon, where you can actually zoom in and get particular information about jurisdictions, agencies, or particular projects. But if there's one takeaway from this map, you can really see how many projects there are in this region. So how much is going on in the region in bicycle and pedestrian facility planning. Here's a snapshot of what you're going to see in the data dashboard. It doesn't look much different, except you're going to be able to click on certain attributes and do different kinds of visualizations. So a little bit of an outlook here. So this has, because we're coincident in time with the development approval of the new Visualize 2045, we've coordinated. So we're going to make these documents as compatible as they can be. We certainly have gone through several of the subcommittees or committees for review and comments and try to accommodate those as much as we could, including Access for All Advisory Committee, Community Advisory Committee, the TPB Technical Committee, and of course our great thanks to the Bicycle and Pedestrian Subcommittee who's been looking at this for well over a year. I also want to acknowledge my staff, my colleagues here on staff who worked so hard on it. Michael Farrell is here in the room with me, as well as John Sherman, our technical experts on some of these, Charlene Howard and other GIS staff on a lot of those features. So as per my understanding, the TPB schedule, this is being presented for review today. It will come back for slated for proposed approval at the May 18th meeting. So there's a 2-month opportunity to take a look at this. If you do have comments, sooner rather than later would be preferable so that we have a better chance of actually addressing the comments. And we'll do that as much as feasible. Some things we may not be able to do. There's always a new project, there's always a new plan, there's always a new completion. So, there has to be a pencils down moment, and we'll get these. But we'll be able to update the database more frequently. So that concludes my comments, and if there's time for questions, I would be happy to take.
Thank you, Andrew. I mean, I think this is an exciting topic, and I look forward to the interactive map and seeing that more. I'm going to start with questions from people in the room. Please, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the presentation. Very, very interesting topic. I have 2 questions. Number 1 is about the emergence of e-bike mobility. I see that I'm coming from Arlington County, which is a hilly place. So this literally redefines low stress. And most users, most cyclists begin to understand that. I also think that this has implications of how we think about infrastructure, the kind of trails, the width of trails, the equipment of trails, etc. So I would like to have your feedback on how do we account for this relatively new trend. And the second is about pedestrian. facilities and how we built around these. I always understood that in the metropolitan region, especially in the core region, the activity centers have been developing into, we talk very often of transit-oriented development, but it's also the pedestrian-oriented development, that this is extremely strong and has driven a lot of value, a lot of housing, and, it has made us think again about how we plan. So I want to have your feedback on these two issues.
Well, thank you for the questions, and I might ask my colleague Michael Farrell might be able to have more subject matter expertise on the e-bikes. I'll give it a shot, which is to say that, we think about whether the operating characteristics of the e-bikes are much different than regular bicycles. Then we have to think about, the speed, the way the facilities are built, whether pedestrians and bicyclists are together, what rules, and of course we don't make rules at our level, govern the use of bicycles like that. So if it's something that gets somebody out of their SOV and gets them onto a bike, even an e-bike, I think that sounds pretty good. And if we can have connectivity, if this can be something that benefits people who need to get to work and so forth, I think that would be good. But that would be, we certainly acknowledge these technological, advancements in this plan. But in a moment, I'll ask Mike if he has some additional comments regarding the pedestrian facilities. I really appreciate that comment. As it one of the hardest challenges, I think, is to talk about and promote pedestrian infrastructure because it's small scale in a lot of cases, or it's very localized. The conditions are very localized. We certainly describe best practices in this plan to talk about what is desired, what's good, what kinds of things you need. And the improvements we've had, such as through, the TAFA program, are important. And, we remain concerned about, especially those mid-suburbs where there's more bicycling and walking, there's more zero-car households in places that didn't have good pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure built, decades ago, and, playing catch-up. So those are concerns, that we have, and I think we point to in the plan. And I'll invite Mike if he has any additional comments on those.
Sure, thanks, Andy. Let's see. I mean, e-bikes are sort of an emerging feature, and when we were looking at those, one thing that we look at with respect to our trail system is that with respect to the National Capital Trail Network and other facilities, is that we typically define it in terms of a design speed. So design speed shouldn't be more than, say, 20 miles an hour. And typically an e-bike has a properly defined, has a cutout feature where you no longer get the electric assist at speeds exceeding 20 miles per hour. Now, why 20 miles per hour? Because there are many very fit bicyclists who are capable of maintaining speeds on that level. So you have a speed which is similar for many bicyclists as for e-bikes. There are still operating distance differences, like for example, an e-bike, because of the throttle, it can typically start up faster than even a very fit bicyclist is able to do. But that's how we chose to address the e-bike issue.
Thank you. I wanted to just to encourage you to look also, and these are my questions also to our staff, etc. So whether not only the speed issue, not only the assist just is a means to attract a lot more users and a lot more cyclists. This means that the technical specs for the capacity of the network should be at least scalable to this, or to some notion of this increase in demand. The second thing is there are other issues as well. Storage, for example, is an issue for me, and charging or having some sort of supporting infrastructure for that. So that's for me kind of the questions that float in my mind when I think about that.
Thank you. If I could add to all of your points, very well made. The support infrastructure that would be needed to continue to grow this particular mode share, whether it's for commute or not commuting purposes, that is going to be important. As we have seen in the past 10 years, the residents of this region have really taken to bicycling. So I think that is a very valid point. One of the ways that the TPB has tried to envision this enhanced use is the standards that it chose of the 2,800 plus planned lane miles of bike facilities. Only 1,400 miles is what the TPB has branded as National Capital Trails Network. One of the criteria that we used was what was the width of that trail. If it was a 4-foot trail, we did not consider it. Not that 4-foot trails are not needed or are not appropriate. They might be. But the National Capital Trail was conceived as a means of connecting employment centers, commercial activity centers, regional activity centers, transit stations, that sort of thing. So we have said you should have at least 8-foot width. Now, that is, as of now, we will have to see what additional engineering and pavement management techniques will be needed as the usage of these trails go up, along with changes in the type of vehicles or bicycles that use the trail. So, very valid point. Thanks.
Brian, go ahead, then Patrick.
Hi, it's Brian again from Law. As a part B to the gentleman's question, we're curious about, did you look at other human-assisted mobiles when looking at this? It's from a safety perspective. A lot of jurisdictions are having issues with the scooters. That's nothing that we're not aware of, scooters and skateboards, but more scooters for also long-term assisted pedestrian transportation. Did we look at that at all when we were talking about this? That's part A. And part B, under the interactive part of your data, will jurisdictions be able to drop in anything to update what their projects are, even newer updates or completions on certain parts of the project on the interactive map? Thank you.
Thank you for your questions. So for the first one, there is coverage in this plan about micromobility devices that are that have come up upon the scene. So we do have some explanation. I don't know that it's the final word. The TPB, through the Bicycle and Pedestrian Subcommittee, particularly before the pandemic, but we certainly plan to restart, has had a number of opportunities where we brought in the staffs of our member jurisdictions to talk specifically about the opportunities and challenges of micromobility and learning, on the ground as these things sort of came up suddenly from the private sector and grappling with use issues, with regulations, with parking was mentioned. And so this is an ongoing challenge, and we have an ongoing planning program to look at this. So I think we do we do have that. And now I've lost your second question. Oh, yes. So we will take comments in terms of there's technical corrections that we can make. Past that, there will be a sort of an annual cycle to get updates. And Michael can help me out of whether or not there's the outsiders have technical access or whether they submit that to staff. If you want to comment.
Sure. Yeah. The what we affectionately call the PIT database is it is something that if you are an authorized user, you can go in and I have to, if it's a project that's already in there, I have to then reject it, put it back out for edits. They can edit it, and then I can accept it back in. It also has a built-in mapping function so that you can add a bike trail or facility in if you've got a new facility. And I believe that function is headed for some technical upgrades, although that's I can't offer a definitive answer on that.
So we'll have a process by which the authorized people, so we don't want just any person updating the databases, but the authorized people will be able to provide some edits in whatever way. and the edits will be available, on a cyclical basis, right?
Yeah, I think we'll tentatively, I'm hoping to get a push to have, it makes sense to have everyone update their projects at roughly the same time. So tentatively, I think on an annual basis would make sense so that we can keep this information reasonably fresh.
Patrick, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your work in putting all this together. It's great to have a really comprehensive picture of the bicycle and pedestrian plans in the region. My question, one of the reasons why the Capital Trails Network was developed, and one of the sort of focal points for that is to help prioritize and kind of set especially looking at factors like connectivity and equity, and how trails can really be used as a tool for not just connecting to jobs, but also to making sure that people in areas that have historically been under resourced for investment in active transportation infrastructure do have access to that, and that trails are a tool for equity. Is there any? I understand that this is really that you do take a look at the equity emphasis areas, and there is a focus on some focus on where that infrastructure is needed. Is there any thought about sort of prioritizing, even going beyond just the Capital Trails Network, and looking at how trails around the region how we can build on that to really use trails as a tool for equitable access to safe walking and biking, equitable access to jobs, really looking at the connectivity piece as well as just where the new investment is going to be located.
I think, Mr. Wayan, the question, what we have done in terms of the GIS capabilities is to overlay where the planned bike pedestrian projects are within each jurisdiction with the regional equity emphasis area. So we can look at them spatially and say, these are the projects. The second piece of information we have added is around those trails, within half a mile, what is the number of population, what's the number of jobs that are accessible. So we are providing some metrics for prioritization. Oftentimes, identifying which of the many projects that a local jurisdiction has raises up to the priority is governed by what other land use activities are going on, what opportunities there might be for co-investment, partnering, or proffers, as they say in Virginia. So those priorities, particularly at the small project level, as Andrew was mentioning earlier, is best done and most information available within the local jurisdiction level. If the localities or if our members have a process through which they have identified what their priorities are, that is definitely something we can add to the GIS database, so that when we see that, we say, okay, here are some of the things. And if there is an interest to go after some of these new federal grants, competitive grants, then we could look at, okay, here are 10 projects from 10 different jurisdictions, all of which are their top 2 priorities. Let us stitch them all together and see how that would improve accessibility and connectivity and go after such a grant. So it's doable, but I'm not so sure that at the regional level, we can prioritize the projects for the members. If the members have done it, then we can include it in this plan and use that for such a regional effort.
Can TPB be a resource for jurisdictions in terms of determining which projects, which investments will, I guess, have the greatest impact in terms of providing equitable access to trails, connecting low-income communities, communities of color to safe places to walk and bike and jobs?
We can definitely work with the member jurisdictions if they have specific projects and see how or what methodologies there might be in the best practices arena and advise, hey, this is one of the ways we see how you can quantify the equity benefits of a particular project relative to another project. So we can look at what best practices there are and certainly work with member jurisdictions who may need such services.
Go ahead.
Allison Davis from Metro. I'm excited about this plan, so I'm looking forward to digging into it more, but thanks for all the work on it. So two questions, right? First, how does it relate to TAFAs and TLC? And you know, is there thought that for TLC to provide funding for a project, it has to be in the plan, or are we thinking about kind of how do we tie those two things together? And then the second question, going back to the equity, was equity, like how did we think about equity proactively at the start of the plan, as opposed to just how does this, like how did we think about it in kind of formulating the package of projects that are in there?
Maybe Conti wants to begin that answer.
I can take the second question first. As Andrew said, this regional plan is a compilation of local planned projects. So the question about how was equity considered in conceiving a project at the local level is best answered at the local level. One of the things that we have done, these are locally approved bike pedestrian plans. So we didn't try to second guess what the members had done. They've said, okay, this is what each of the 23 member jurisdictions are planning to implement in the next 20 years. How will it connect the region if we all stitch that together? And then we started overlaying other regional priorities, such as equity emphasis areas, such as the high capacity transit areas. So that's kind of what we've done, how equity has been woven into this at the regional level. The earlier, your first part of the question, would you mind repeating that? On the TLC, which is the Transportation Land Use Connections, and the TAP program, Transportation Alternative Programs, and now the Transit Station Access Focus Areas, the TAFA, all three of them uses as a criteria any trail project that comes for grant applications. It uses a couple of criteria. It looks at, is this project either in or connecting or serving an equity emphasis area? So equity is considered that way. It is also looking at, is this part of the National Capital Trail Network? So as Andrew was saying, the entire 2,800-mile regional bike ped plan is a priority, and we want it completed because it connects, it has 76% of the population, 86% of the jobs, so it's an important infrastructure to be built. But for the TPB grants, we look at a subset of that, which is the 1,400-mile National Capital Trail, because those are at a higher level. It provides more connectivities and more accessibility to more jobs and more people. So National Capital Trail Network is used as a criteria. That doesn't mean that if a project is not part of the National Capital Trail Network, but is part of a local jurisdiction's trail plan or this regional plan, it will still be considered. But you get bonus points if it is part of the National Capital Trail.
I guess what I might add, Conti, is that we have a plan document and we also have a planning process. We have subcommittees, we have training opportunities, we have the reviews that go on in these grant programs. And maybe we'll think about if we can lean forward a little bit more in the language that's in this plan about how it relates to the TPB's planning process. So I would answer that we do have a lot of these are living in the planning process as opposed to say static in the static plan, which is I think a little bit more infrastructure based. But that's good food for thought.
Great. Okay, Casey, go ahead, and then we're going to go. Let's see. Is anyone online? I want to make sure that we get to those people online as well.
Hi, I really need to go. If there's a way for me to just ask my question before I go.
Are you okay with that, Casey? Yeah, go ahead.
Yes. So I really appreciate all the work that's been done here, and I just want to kind of, ask a couple of questions regarding the integration of plans. I have several bike pedestrian plans underway or in the works that, through spaces, through the work that we have supported with TLC in Langley Park, um, MD 193, and now we're doing a mobility connectivity study out in Carroll Highlands, in addition to the work that um, people took them up themselves in Avondale to improve walkability and safe pedestrian safety, in addition to the expansion of we've completed now the trail that connects to DC from the riverfront at West Hyattsville. We still need to improve the connectivity into Avondale. Same thing with the Rhode Island Trolley Trail that's still very much pending, as well as the trail to one of the Purple Line stations off of Lebanon, a naturally occurring trail. And so we're working on a lot to improve, but where is the integration between what, let's say, an individual jurisdiction is doing, like myself, and the work that you're doing?
Thank you. The plan includes a summary and references to member agency and local jurisdiction plans, and that's quite a long list. So there's a lot of them there, and there's pointers to that. Secondly, our participating members did submit their planned projects within this database process. So the hope is that we've got those in the database and that they can be analyzed. But we can certainly work with you or look back and see if we're missing anything from that regard. But it's my understanding that through those processes, we have gotten all of those, and we do not repeat the detail that a local plan would have. This is sort of a regional overarching document.
Thank you. I just want to make sure that you're also including anything from park and planning, at least on our side, and the council member who's initiating those conversations. But I want to say thank you. I got to get going. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm going to go back to Casey Kostick and then the two people online, but we do have one other item, and I'm trying to stay on time. So go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for this. It's really, I think, important work to move forward on these important modes of transit. Two questions. One is regarding the pedestrian access, which I think is very hard to measure, as you pointed out, because it is a lot of smaller scale projects. I think it would be useful if some of the work that's been done on the walk sheds around transit, high capacity transit centers could be included and incorporated into here. And also maybe some type of walkability score or something that sort of indicates how people are able to access as pedestrians the services that they need. And my second question is more related to bikes and the bike access. One of the things that I think often gets overlooked in conversations about bikes is younger users. So children who are much harder to see if they're using crossing streets or using on-street facilities. And I've seen some of the planning processes sometimes overemphasize the adult user versus the child user, even when there maybe is a need to access schools in that location. So just wondering if there's some aspect here that can be incorporated regarding the needs of really young users of bikes and kind of emphasizing that type of facility.
I think we can look into all of those. Just basically, as a short answer, let's see what we can do to strengthen the content on all of those. Okay, you had a comment.
Yes, with respect to the TAFAs, we know whether or not our network, our low-stress network, serves a TAFA walk shed. So that's not a buffer analysis. That means it actually enters the walk shed, which is the walkable area. with respect to users of all ages and abilities, and that's what both the National Capital Trail Network and the Low Stress Network, which consists of 3 types of facilities, shared use paths, protected bicycle lanes, and bicycle boulevards, which are traffic calm, low volume, typically residential streets. So all of those 3 types are intended to be usable by people of all ages and abilities.
Thank you. I think in terms of the youngest users, my concern is more that the on-street facilities are a lot less feasible, and sometimes they then end up being pushed onto the sidewalks, which isn't great for pedestrians or for the safety of the kids using the bikes. But I appreciate that it's obviously coming from the jurisdictions that are submitting the materials in the first place. So thank you.
Okay, staff, the people online, you want to start with who plugged in first?
Dave Snyder.
Does Mr. Snyder go ahead? Mr. Snyder?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick follow-up. In listening to the comments, I think there's a desire for a little more analysis and what should we be doing that we're not doing now in terms of funding, in terms of providing better safety for both pedestrians and bicyclists. And I know there are some chapters in the report, but I think you're hearing a lot of inquiries about what do we do next and how do we push the envelope here rather than simply the excellent report on what we're doing and planning already. Thank you.
Okay. Staff, next person?
Rodney Roberts.
Mr. Roberts, go ahead.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Rodney Roberts, Greenbelt. In the last few years out here in Maryland, I've noticed, on, major roadways where the speed limit might be 50 miles an hour, I see these signs going up, bike path and, rider may use full, bicycle may use full lane. And these are in areas where I think to myself, there's no way I would take that whole lane up, in a 50 mile an hour road where people are, probably doing 60 or 70. And so I'm wondering, what actually qualifies, are there safety, because I'm going back to your, all your points about safety and the issues that are going around that now. And I wonder, what is there a mechanism for judging what actually should qualify as a bike lane? Because I hate to see projects that would make more of that type of, scenario out there, because it scares me, to tell you the truth.
So I'll take a crack at it, and maybe Michael Farrell would like to amplify. In Maryland and other states, the motor vehicle law, is going to state what is allowed, and there's been a state process to decide that, legally speaking, what's going to be signed. Certainly, I think in this plan, the priority, the favor, our favor is toward protected bicycle facilities that don't have that. I mean, in some cases, particularly in rural areas, maybe those facilities exist for connectivity reasons, for, experienced bicyclists, this kind of thing. So we're going to, reflect the law that is provided, and as well as to recommend the protected and low stress facilities for exactly the reasons that you mentioned.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay. Are there any other questions from anybody online? How about in the room? Okay, thank you very much. I think you got a lot of feedback. Hopefully can take things forward before we discuss this again. So
appreciate it.
Thank you. Okay, next and the last item for today, we'll hear from COG's Director for Community Planning Services, Paul Desjardins. Paul, I understand you will be talking about the forecast growth of population, jobs, and households in our region. Certainly, I'm interested to see what the thinking is on potential changes in growth in our post-pandemic period. So, Paul, the floor is yours.
Yeah, Chair Sobieski, just similar to the last item, the context for this briefing is the long-range transportation plan depends to a large degree on what is the projections for growth in our region, population growth, employment, and households. So we are interested, or the long-range transportation plan depends on understanding what is the amount of growth that we in our region anticipate and are planning for and are hoping for the next 25 years. It also depends significantly on where that growth is projected to happen, which means that is a local land use planning decision. Where housing is going to go, where jobs are going to go, what density, what mix of land use will be permitted, all of that is done at the local level, but that then informs the travel demand modeling that the TPB does. And by law, we are required to use the approved land use coming from the local jurisdictions. The TPB may have ideas on how to do it, but it can't come up with that and use it in its long-range plan. It has to use the locally approved plans. So that is one of the things. So this is, the TPB staff don't do this work, but the COG, Department of Community Planning and Services, does, and Paul is the director of that program, so we are going to hear from him. This is a coordinated work activity that happens every year. So just wanted to highlight some of the things that we are planning for the next major update of our forecast, particularly in the context of if we are returning back to offices today, in a year or so, what will a post-pandemic period look like and what does it hold for our region in terms of growth, which is then going to influence the transportation system demands and needs. So, Paul?
Thank you, Conti. Madam Chair, members of the board, I'm very pleased to be here with you. Pleased to see you all in person. I actually had the pleasure of going to Montgomery County Council yesterday to do a briefing to their first back in-person meeting. So it's sort of feeling like things are getting back to a level of normalcy. So I think that's a good thing from where I sit. As Conti said, I'm going to give you a little bit of a refresher on the forecasting process and spend a bit more time talking about some of the major elements that we're looking at going forward. So again, this will be a refresher for a number of you, and then hopefully some more information to foster some good questions. Again, this is a schematic of the forecasting process. The planning directors of the region established the forecasting program back in the mid-'70s. As Conti said, one of the principal uses is for the transportation modeling process, why it's so important to this committee. But there was a consensus that the region needed a consistent set of growth projections for all sorts of capital improvements planning for a variety of local and regional needs. And so that's really the genesis of the process. We euphemistically refer to it as top-down and bottom-up. That blue box in the upper left-hand corner is the top-down. It's the maximum amount of growth from an econometric perspective we think the region is going to receive over the next 25 to 30 years. The bottom left corner is really the strength. Conti alluded to this. The forecasts are the product of your planning staffs. They take a look at current permitting reviews, dirt's being turned, a permit's being issued right now. They look at local long-range plans, comprehensive plans, small area plans, synthesize them, and we compare them to the forecasting model. We reconcile them and come up with that green box that you see on the right there, the forecasts by the more than 3,000 traffic zones that go into the process. Round 9.2 was an incremental update. A major round is round 9.0, a round 8.0, a 6.0. We have a process in place so that jurisdictions can petition to update their forecasts every year as needed, as Conti alluded to. Very quickly, the 9.2 forecast, these are being used now by the TPB staff in the air quality conformity analysis of the constrained element to visualize. About a 26% increase in jobs, 23% increase in pop, and about a 25% increase in households over the next 25 years. I mentioned this was an incremental update. When you compare the forecasts that are being used now, 9.2 compared to the predecessor, less than a 1% increase in, or change rather, in those forecasts for the year 2045. So again, very incremental update from the prior round of projections. What do the forecasts look like? Well, this I would actually suggest is looking at 2045. and how so? The lighter portion of each one of those bars is the number of jobs that are on the ground in a particular jurisdiction in the year 2020. The darker red portion is the increment that's expected over the next 25 years. Not sure. So the mic's still working. It sounded like it dropped off. Put the two together, you have 2045. Again, this is rank ordered in terms of who had the greatest number of jobs in the year 2020, the district followed by Fairfax, Montgomery, and so forth. I bring this context of 2045 up, particularly as we think about alternative visions and changes for the future. That red portion, that's the portion of the future that we can actually influence, the increment of growth. 80% of 2045 is already on the ground now. 90% of 2030 is already on the ground now. So we need to be mindful when we look at scenarios and influencing the future. On the margin, there's some very incremental opportunities. So I think we need to be very much aware of that. The companion, obviously, is the residential growth, households here. Again, showing the lighter portion of each bar is what was on the ground in 2020, the darker blue portion for each jurisdiction, the increment of growth that they're anticipating over the next 25 years. Again, comes directly from your local planning departments based on the process I mentioned before. So that's 9.2. What I'd like to focus on is really the work that is already underway for the next major update of the forecast, round 10.0. These are the major buckets, the major tranches, if you will, of elements of the work plan, and I'll touch on each one of them a bit. But again, put our finger to the wind on existing economic conditions, work with the member jurisdictions to provide them the base year data they need, and then, again, reconcile and come up with a complete set of projections. So I talked about the current economic situation. One of the things we monitor and report on is residential multifamily construction, office construction, commercial construction. What you're looking at here comes from that same data source, is looking at, for the most recent periods, fourth quarter for the last 3 years, office vacancy rates for the district, suburban Maryland, and northern Virginia. Not too surprisingly, vacancy rates crept up. They accelerated actually during the second year of the pandemic, and you can see arrayed there what the vacancy rates were at the end of calendar year 2021 relative to the 2 prior years. Another data source that we've been tracking and which we're looking at here is about 6 months of that reporting is from a local business. There's a company in Arlington called Castle Systems, and they have a niche that they serve, which is those security cards that you swipe when you go through the turnstile or to open your office door to gain access. Castle has a presence in 10 of the major metropolitan areas across the country, including our region. And so what we're looking at here is a comparison of return to office for our region in the red line below compared to the 10 major markets for the country as a whole above. So what you can see rolling into the fall, we were becoming more comfortable returning to office. Then you can see that massive drop when Omicron really took hold in the holidays. And office return to office as measured by these key card swipes really, really plummeted. We are recovering. As you see, we are back up in the mid-30s, 35% for our region compared to 36, 38% for the 10 metropolitan areas as a whole. Should point out, we as a region are ranked about 3rd or 4th from the bottom when it came to this return to office indicator. Places like Austin and Dallas and Houston are up in the high 50%. So just to put a little context on this as a data series. I'll also bring it up in the context of this slide. What we're looking at here is the next 4 years of office leases that will be coming up for renewal, and they're color-coded by office, the class type, A, B, and C, as you can see to the right-hand side. Almost 44 million square feet of commercial office space is coming up for lease over the next 4 years. And you might say, well, what does that look like? We're in a 300,000 square foot building right here. So it's the equivalent of somewhere between 140 and 150 buildings like the one that we are in right now that are coming up for lease renewals. Why is that important? Well, if you're an office tenant and you're considering things like return to office, flexible work hours, What footprint might you consider going into the future? How much space would you want relative to where your lease is right now? And in the current environment, what sort of premiums might you be considering? Might you ask for leasing rates? It's an important indicator, and I think it's something we really want to be mindful of, bear watching over the next few years as these leases move forward. Related to that, and you all were briefed on this last year, this is from the Voices of the Region survey. You can see the largest element there, fully 2/3 of workers who responded said, I really would like to telework sometime during the year going forward. A little bit more than 1 out of every 4 said, no, I really want to telework full-time, but less than 10%, 1 out of every 11 said, oh yeah, I absolutely want to be back in the office full-time. So again, sort of a snapshot of the mindsets of where workers were at the height of the pandemic, and again, backing into this question of return to office and office occupancy. Corollary to this is some work from George Mason University. This looks at perspectives of workers by age cohort. How do they feel about returning to work, generally speaking? So the encouraging one is overall that first group, about half of all workers said it doesn't show quite as clearly, but that 48% is I would always or mostly want to be back in the office. I think equally encouraging is that first age cohort bar, the 18 to 29-year-olds. 3 out of every 5 said, I absolutely want to be back in the office on a pretty regular basis. And we can think of a whole host of reasons, early stages of your career, socializing, opportunity to meet a potential partner or spouse. So that's a very encouraging sign from where I sit. Lastly, and I'll wrap up here in a second, this is from a survey that the Schar School undertook concerning people who moved during the pandemic. The dark blue bars are for all movers. The sort of gold color bars are for households who said they chose to move due to the pandemic itself. So those first couple of bars, not too surprisingly, people move because they want lower crime rates, higher quality schools, traditional decisions that homeowners' households would make. Call your attention to a couple of things, though. You look to the far right, not too surprisingly, that gold bar for more space at the height of the pandemic. That was a driver among households who chose to move. Need a bigger house, need a bigger backyard for my children, whatever sort of reason. Corollary to that, to the left, I think it's sort of interesting. Only about 17% of people who moved due to the pandemic said they chose because they wanted to be closer to their family. So I think there's a little bit of insight of, okay, I'm ready to spread out a bit more here. So probably a number of ways that could be interpreted. So very quickly, I mentioned these. I won't go through all of the details on the right-hand side. The copies of the slides are in your handout, but just to give you, again, a sense of the elements that we go through to develop a major round of forecasts. We look at the major assumptions, as I said, the econometric demand, what type of future would we have from both a job growth and a housing growth perspective. We're going to extend the horizon to 2050. For this series of forecasts, we want to look at the impacts of COVID-19, the near term and the long term, and how could that quantify or be quantified? How would that be made aware in the forecast? We look at commercial space utilization assumptions. I mentioned before just about office, but also retail space. Retail obviously is changing, continues to change. And then demographic assumptions. The average household size in this region plummeted during the 70s. It leveled off, and since the year 2000, average household size in the region has actually crept up a little bit for a whole host of reasons. We're more diverse, more extended families, larger households, and so forth. Very quickly, again, I mentioned all of these before, benchmarking to the 2020, a new model. We compile forecasts beyond the COG footprint for the entire TPB modeled region. And again, we'll bring forward to the COG board and then eventually to this body for the use of the forecast. Wrapping up here very, very quickly, we have turned, the TPB has an on-call consultant. And so we have turned our speaking right now with them to ask them to sort of get under the hood, if you will, and help us really see how can we quantify some of these trends we talked about. So one, We index the forecast to the most likely future, the econometric model. We're going to ask the consultant to take a look and see what sort of drivers might cause the forecast at the regional level to be perhaps a little bit higher, perhaps a little bit lower, maybe in the near term, maybe in the long term, to sort of bound the confidence of what the future might be, again, given sort of the ongoing uncertainties of COVID. The next two, I mentioned both of these before, we're going to ask them to look into trends about what will be the average household size going forward. Why is that important? Planners project housing units based on land use plans. It's very easy to look at a land use plan and say how many units are going to be there, what type, by zoning. Then you get into the calculus, well, how many people are going to be there and how many children are going to be there, how many elderly will be there, and that begins to drive the demographic trends that local governments rely on for schools, human services, social services, and so forth. That second bullet, office and retail space usage, I mentioned that earlier. For years, the assumption was you needed about 250 square feet for a traditional office worker. Gotten into hot seating, telework, maybe that number has crept down to more like 150 feet, maybe 100 square feet per worker. If you add to that sort of diminished footprint for every worker you have, and what if those workers aren't going back into the office as much as they used to be? Suddenly the calculus of how much space can be occupied really sort of moves to the forefront there. And then lastly, that last bullet, and I know at our last meeting, my colleague Nick showed the guaranteed ride home map, the service area. That to me is always very instructive. I share that with folks whenever I give conversations or present on the future. One of the things we're asking the consultant to look into is what are the potential impacts to the timing and location of future housing in this region. We need to do more to intervene to increase the supply of housing in the right places, housing that is affordably priced for workers across the spectrum, but there is already existing pressure well beyond our footprint in residential markets in the southern tier of Pennsylvania, the Shenandoah Valley, and I would like to really get some sense of will those pressures increase going forward. So lastly, wrapping up here, as I said, we approved 9.2 in draft format. The TPB staff is using it now. It will be approved officially later this year when the results of the air quality conformity goes forward. As I said, the next two bullets, around 10, is already underway. We've begun giving the data to jurisdictions or having the conversations with them, as we said, right now. And then that very last bullet, we continue to monitor on the near term and the long term what are sort of the evolving impacts of COVID on this region. So with that, Madam Chair, I am done, and I know I'm standing between everyone and what is a beautiful afternoon, so I'd be happy to answer any questions folks have.
Thank you. Are there any questions from those in the room? Go ahead, sir.
Thank you. Really interesting update and presentation. Just two reactions. One on the office to residential conversion. Absolutely an important thing to look at. I can tell you in Fairfax, we're actually seeing more hotel to residential conversion than office. So that's important to look at too. Maybe it's included in that category. And then kind of more broadly, I feel like there's this category of person, worker that isn't captured in traditional forecasting and planning, but is a growing category, and that's people who are fully remote, people who might work for a corporation or might be freelance or solopreneurs, but have the flexibility to live anywhere in the country or anywhere in the world that they want. I think that's going to be kind of economic development competition for the next foreseeable future, and I suspect it's how many of those people are in our region, where are they moving, why are they moving there, are they choosing us or not, or why not? But I think as we look at this forecast, if there's a way to start wrapping our heads around that and capturing that dynamic, I know that would certainly be a benefit to us in Fairfax.
My short answer, yes, yes, and yes to both of them, because I do think your last point, that is very difficult to quantify. And some of it goes to the heart of the flexibility of employers. But as you said, sir, it's an economic development challenge for workers living remotely, and it's a very, very important part of it.
Also, how much, speak for us, our projections of household growth and population growth are tied to our projections commercial office space in Tyson and Reston, and their workers having to live in the region, and whether that's going to be the case or to what extent that's going to be the case. So I feel like, obviously we have to move forward, but I feel like a lot of the traditional mechanisms and formulas to do this kind of planning are going to be in flux over the next 5 years.
Okay, anyone else in the room? Sure, go ahead, Takas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the presentation. Very interesting topic. I have always a personal question on that. Is the metrics of transiency in the population. So, for example, it makes a big difference if we deal with a workforce where the average professional life is like 15 years or 10 years, and we see a trend, and I can tell you that for Arlington, that recent bigger developers, bigger employers, they have significantly shorter retention spans for their personnel, and that means different lifestyle choices for these employees. It makes difference whether you are a federal employee for 20 years or you are an Amazon employee for an average of 3 years and then you are somewhere else. So that's what I don't know how the econometric model would capture that.
I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, that really is a challenge. And again, some of it goes to sort of the economic competitiveness of an individual employer. Do you have a contract for limited duration? Well, then that's your decision. If it's trying to be what is now a very competitive labor market, what sort of incentives, what sort of what opportunities would you offer for a worker who their horizon is much shorter than you might want them for 5 years, and they might be thinking, well, I'm probably only going to stick this out for a couple of years. So corollary to that, and some of you may have heard it, there was a phrase that popped up over the last year about the Great Resignation, that so many people were stepping away from jobs. Well, I've heard recently there's now, and I'm going to get the number wrong, but I think it's something like 2/3, 70% of people who responded that they did resign now have regrets that they didn't stay, in fact, with the job that they previously held for whatever reasons. The new one didn't work out, or, the grass is always greener type of thing. But lots of dynamics in place without question.
Okay. Thank you. Is there anybody online? Okay, great. Are there any other questions in the chambers? Okay. Before we adjourn, please note that the next in-person meeting is scheduled for noon on April 20th, 2022, and there will be a work session, however, that will be in person as well, starting at 10:15. So please get the surveys that were sent out to you, talk to your staff, talk to your other elected colleagues, and get those returned back to staff by April the 1st, so we will be able to have good conversation on April 20th. And with that, I will adjourn the meeting. Thank you, guys. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, staff. I think it went well.
Thank you.
I think it was well too.
Oh, thank you. Very nice to meet you, probably, right?
Yeah. So I'm an old hat and talk. I'm far chief.